What if I told you that in a single year, a year already mythologized for producing some of rock music's most enduring monuments, a handful of albums were released that were so audacious, so far ahead of their time, that they were met with little more than commercial indifference and critical bewilderment? What if these records, far from being flawed experiments, were in fact fully realized artistic statements, brimming with a creative fire that still burns with a fierce intensity a half-century later? This isn't a hypothetical scenario. This is the story of 1971, a year that saw the titans of progressive rock solidifying their reign, while in the shadows, a few brave and arguably foolhardy bands were crafting masterpieces that would be relegated to the dustbin of history, only to be unearthed decades later by a new generation of sonic archaeologists. These are the tales of 5 such albums, records that are as brilliant as they are obscure, and the reasons why they represent a road not taken in the evolution of rock music. The year 1971 was a pressure cooker of musical innovation. The psychedelic dreams of the late 60s had given way to a more technically ambitious and compositionally complex approach to rock music. Bands like Yes, with the Yes album and Fragile, and Genesis with Nursery Crime were laying the groundwork for what would become the dominant aesthetic of progressive rock. Virtuosic musicianship, epic song structures, and lyrical themes that ventured far beyond the typical rock and roll concerns. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Tarkus was a bombastic fusion of rock and classical music that stormed the charts, proving that there was a significant audience for this new, more demanding form of musical expression. Yet, for all the talk of pushing boundaries, there was already a formula beginning to emerge, a set of conventions that, while expansive, still operated within a recognizable framework. The bands that would achieve massive success in the coming years did so by tempering their experimentation with a certain degree of palatability. Their music was complex, but it was also, for the most part, clean, polished, and ultimately, safe. But what of the bands who refused to play it safe? What of the artists who ventured so far into the wilderness that they lost sight of the trail back to commercial viability? This is where our story begins, in the murky, often unforgiving underbelly of the British music scene, where the line between genius and madness was often perilously thin. Our first exhibit is an album that is less a collection of songs and more a sonic exorcism, Comus's First Utterance. To call this album unsettling would be a gross understatement. From the opening moments of Diana, with its frenetic acoustic guitars and Roger Wooten's feral, almost unhinged vocals, it is clear that we are in uncharted territory. This is not the pastoral gentlefolk of Fairport Convention or Pentangle. This is something far more primal, a descent into a pre-Christian world of pagan rituals, violence, and madness. The instrumentation is almost entirely acoustic, yet it possesses a ferocity that would put most heavy metal bands to shame. The interplay between the jagged violin of Colin Pearson and the intricate, often dissonant guitar work of Wooten and Glenn Goring creates a sense of constant tension, a feeling that the music is perpetually on the verge of collapsing into chaos. The lyrical themes of First Utterance are as shocking today as they were in 1971. Songs like Drip Drip and Song to Comus deal with themes of rape and murder with a chilling directness that is still difficult to process. Yet there is a strange, almost terrifying beauty to be found in the madness. The vocal harmonies of Wooten and Bobby Watson are often breathtakingly beautiful, creating a stark contrast with the ugliness of the subject matter. This is music that refuses to look away from the darkness, that confronts the most savage aspects of human nature with an unflinching gaze. It is not surprising that First Utterance was a commercial disaster. The album was met with a mixture of confusion and outright hostility from the music press. The band itself was a combustible unit, and they would splinter shortly after the album's release. For decades, First Utterance was little more than a footnote in the history of progressive rock, a whispered legend among a small circle of devoted fans. Yet, its influence has been profound. David Bowie was an early champion of the band, and its DNA can be found in the work of countless artists who have sought to explore the darker, more primal side of folk music. Mikael Åkerfeldt of the Swedish metal band Opeth has cited the album as a major influence. First Utterance is a testament to the power of music to disturb, to provoke, and to haunt the listener long after the final notes have faded. From the pagan darkness of Comus, we move to the lush, symphonic landscapes of our second lost classic, Spring's self-titled debut. If First Utterance is a journey into the heart of darkness, then Spring is a voyage into a world of melancholic beauty. The dominant instrument on this album is the mellotron, a primitive tape-based keyboard that was capable of producing a hauntingly beautiful, if notoriously unreliable, string sound. While many progressive rock bands of the era used the mellotron to add a touch of orchestral grandeur to their music, Spring made it the very foundation of their sound. The result is an album that is awash in a sea of strings, creating a sound that is both epic and deeply intimate. The songs on Spring are built around the smoky, often wistful vocals of Pat Moran and the tasteful melodic guitar work of Ray Martinez. The lyrics are contemplative and often tinged with a sense of loss and longing, as evidenced by song titles like Shipwrecked Soldier and Song to Absent Friends. Yet, for all its melancholy, there is a warmth and a humanity to this music that is often lacking in the more bombastic and technically focused work of their contemporaries. This is music that is not afraid to be beautiful, to wear its heart on its sleeve. Like Comus, Spring was a band that seemed to exist outside of the prevailing trends of the time. They were not as technically flashy as Yes or ELP, nor did they possess the theatrical flair of Genesis. Their music was more subtle, more understated, and it required a level of patience and attention that was perhaps in short supply in the fast-paced world of early 70s rock. The album failed to make a commercial impact, and the band would dissolve shortly after its release. For years, Spring was a highly sought-after collector's item, a lost artifact of the progressive rock era. Today, it stands as a testament to the power of melody and atmosphere, a reminder that progressive rock could be as much about feeling as it was about technical prowess. Our third exhibit, Gracious as This Is Gracious, is a more aggressive and overtly progressive affair than the previous two albums. This is a band that was clearly influenced by the likes of King Crimson, with their complex time signatures, jarring dynamic shifts, and a penchant for extended instrumental workouts. The centerpiece of the album is the 25-minute suite Supernova, a sprawling epic that moves through a variety of moods and styles, from heavy riff-based rock to more delicate, classically inflected passages. The musicianship is top-notch, with guitarist Alan Cowderoy and keyboardist Martin Kitcat engaging in a series of thrilling instrumental duels. What sets Gracious apart from many of their contemporaries is their willingness to embrace a certain level of raw, almost garage rock energy. There is a grit and a sense of urgency to their playing that is often missing from the more polished productions of the era. This is a band that sounds like they are playing for their lives, and that energy is infectious. The album is not without its flaws. The vocals can be a bit overwrought at times, and some of the more experimental passages can feel a bit unfocused. Yet, there is a sense of daring and a commitment to pushing the boundaries of rock music that is impossible to deny. The story of Gracious is a familiar one in the annals of progressive rock. They were a band with a wealth of talent and ambition, but they were unable to secure the backing of a record label that truly understood their vision. This Is Gracious was released on the Philips label, a subsidiary of the larger Vertigo Records, but it received little in the way of promotion. The band had already broken up by the time the album was released, and it quickly faded into obscurity. Today, it stands as a powerful example of the more aggressive and experimental side of early British progressive rock. Our fourth lost masterpiece comes from a duo of musicians who had already tasted success as members of one of the most important bands in the history of progressive rock. MacDonald and Giles's self-titled album is a fascinating what-if scenario in the history of King Crimson. Ian MacDonald and Michael Giles were both founding members of that seminal band, and their contributions to their debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King, were immense. However, they both grew weary of the pressures of touring and the darker, more intense direction that the band was taking, and they departed in 1969. The following year, they reconvened to record this one-off album, and the results are a revelation. MacDonald and Giles is a much lighter and more melodic affair than anything King Crimson would ever record. The album is filled with beautiful pastoral melodies, lush vocal harmonies, and a sense of warmth and optimism that stands in stark contrast to the often bleak soundscapes of their former band. The musicianship is, of course, impeccable. Giles's drumming is as inventive and dynamic as ever, and MacDonald's multi-instrumental talents are on full display. The centerpiece of the album is the sidelong suite Birdman, a whimsical and charming piece of music that showcases the duo's compositional and arranging skills. The album is not without its more experimental moments, but even these are infused with a sense of playfulness and a melodic sensibility that makes them accessible and engaging. MacDonald and Giles is the sound of two brilliant musicians freed from the constraints of a band and a genre that they had helped to create, and the result is a joyous and life-affirming album. Once again, however, commercial success proved to be elusive. The album was met with a lukewarm reception from both critics and the public, and MacDonald and Giles would go their separate ways shortly after its release. Our final exhibit is perhaps the most unique and unclassifiable album on our list, Fuchsia's self-titled debut. This is a band that truly defies categorization. At its core, Fuchsia was a folk rock band, but their music was augmented by a string section consisting of 2 violins and a cello. The result is a sound that is both earthy and ethereal, a strange and beautiful hybrid of folk, classical, and psychedelic rock. The songs, written by guitarist and vocalist Tony Durant, are filled with whimsical and often surreal imagery, and they are delivered with a sense of wide-eyed innocence that is utterly charming. The arrangements on Fuchsia are incredibly inventive. The strings are not simply used as a backdrop for the songs. They are an integral part of the music, weaving intricate counter-melodies and engaging in a constant dialogue with the more traditional rock instrumentation. The album is full of unexpected twists and turns, with songs that shift in mood and tempo at a moment's notice. The story of Fuchsia is one of youthful ambition and naivety. The band was formed by a group of university students who were united by a shared love of music and a desire to create something new and different. They managed to secure a record deal with the Pegasus label and recorded their debut album with producer David Hitchcock, who had also worked with Caravan and Genesis. However, the band was ill-prepared for the realities of the music business. They were poorly managed and they received little support from their record label. The album sank without a trace, and the band broke up shortly after its release. For decades, Fuchsia was a lost classic, a record that was known only to a small handful of dedicated collectors. In recent years, however, the album has been rediscovered and reissued, and it has finally begun to receive the recognition it so richly deserves. So why did these 5 brilliant albums fail to find an audience in 1971? The reasons are as complex and varied as the music itself. In some cases, it was simply a matter of bad luck and poor management. In others, it was a case of the music being too challenging, too unconventional for the mainstream tastes of the time. The early 1970s was a period of great musical experimentation, but it was also a time when the music industry was becoming increasingly corporate and risk-averse. The bands that succeeded were the ones that were able to find a balance between artistic ambition and commercial appeal. The bands that we have discussed today were, for the most part, unwilling or unable to make that compromise. Yet, in their failure, they achieved a different kind of success. They created music that was pure and uncompromising, music that was made for no other reason than the joy of creation itself. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy of recordings that continue to inspire and challenge listeners a half-century later. These are not just lost albums. They are secret histories, alternate timelines in the story of rock music. They are a reminder that the most interesting and rewarding music is often found not in the spotlight, but in the shadows. And they pose a question that is as relevant today as it was in 1971. Have we forgotten how to listen? In an age of instant gratification and disposable pop music, these albums demand our attention, our patience, and our willingness to be challenged. They are not easy listens, but they are essential ones. And for those who are willing to take the journey, the rewards are immeasurable.